Hello, everyone. You are on the Hub podcast, episode 34. Whether you are tuning in through the Hub community, if so, hello to our members. If you are listening through our YouTube channel, please don't forget to subscribe to Ask Zoe for all episodes with the Hub podcast and free resources. And if you're listening on Spotify, through Apple Play or Google Play, it is lovely to have you with us. If you have not heard of the Hub podcast before, I am Zoe Wadsworth, the creator of the Hub podcast. Through Ask Zoe, I am a consultant with a difference, help you position your business more successfully by showing up and getting a better return on investment. The Hub is all about business development and the marketing community and how we use this to the value and benefit of our members is that we provide the experts for you to know what you need in business this month. And this month very much has been about the power of sharing your story online. So it is about the topic of personal brand. But I just wanted to share something with you before I introduce our expert. If you are watching on video, you'll be able to see the lovely Peter. And for the listeners through audio, you will hear from him in a moment. But I heard a quote, and I just want you to think about this in terms of the power of personal branding. Because a lot of people say to me, I don't want to show up online. And I'll always say, why? Because it is so beneficial to you in your business by standing out in your competition, in your marketplace. And I read this quote this morning and I wanted to share it with you. Personal brand is the art of becoming knowledgeable, likable, and trustworthy. Now, if you have heard anything in marketing of recent years, it is what is marketing based on? Know, like, and trust. So when we talk about the power of personal branding and how to tell your story, ultimately we are sharing insights in how you can build your marketing, your business, your brand better and stronger by building that know, like, and trust factor. Because let's face it, you're not going to do business with somebody you don't know, like, or trust. You're not going to interact with somebody online if you're an e-commerce business if they don't know, like, and trust your brand. And the most engagement you get through social media is through showing yourself, showing your brand, showing your values. So personal brand is not just about going on video and saying, hi, I'm Zoe Wadsworth of Ask Zoe, or hi, I'm Peter Bray, who is our expert this afternoon. It is much more than that. So I just want to really stress that point on this episode, that personal brand. Take that terminology away. It's about know, like, and trust and the benefit that has on your business. So today's episode is all about the power of telling your story and how to tell your story well. But I'm not the expert for you that can share that insight. That comes in the form of Peter Bray this afternoon on episode 34. So Peter, just introduce yourself to our listeners and tell them who you are and how you can help them.
Thank you so much, Zoe, for having me on the show. My name's Peter Bray. I'm an ex-professional stage actor turned story-driven marketing consultant. So that's who I am and what I do. And I'm so glad to be on the show and really excited to talk, especially after you just said that about know, like, and trust. That's how you get more clients, customers, and sales. And storytelling is a great way to do that.
It is, and we have our story of our own in terms of how we met, and that was very much through a mutual contact who kind of had a one-to-one with myself and listened to our story and how we help our customers and very much said, are you connected with Peter? I think you have the same values. I think you have very similar offerings, but different. I think they more complement each other rather than compete. And as you know, if you've listened to the Hub for a while, there's always no competition within the Hub. It's all about collaboration and support, and Peter very much has them values. So if we talk about this know, like, and trust factor then, Peter, in terms of the power of telling your story, Why do you think people do shy away from that when it comes to personal branding? Let's talk about kind of the problem that businesses face at the minute where they say, oh my God, I can't show up online, or I'm too scared to, or I don't see the value in sharing my personal brand. Why do you think that is?
I think that's a great question, and I think it comes down to the fact that a lot of people are scared of that level of visibility. They are used to seeing stuff on social media that just doesn't align with them. It doesn't feel like how they
Mm-hmm,
would like to represent themselves or their values or their
hmm.
principles. And so they think, well, if I end up online, that's what I'm going to be, and that's what I'm going to end up being drawn into. And um,
Hmm.
that that's my theory is that there's that people don't like being incongruous with their values. They don't like the thought of being pushed into misrepresenting
Hmm.
themselves, feeling fake, feeling like they're having to perform or anything. But as you well
Yeah,
know, like that's kind of the opposite of how you should show up online. That's not actually what you're being asked
yeah.
to do.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. A lot of people do think it is about, being all singing and all dancing. And I know as your actor background, you are kind of the perfect, person to speak to about that because it's that perception, isn't it? If you think
Yeah,
about acting, a lot of people think, oh, it's about, acting, getting up on stage, but it's not just about that. Acting's about telling a story ultimately and telling a story well so it's remembered and more importantly, it evokes a response. If we think
yeah,
about, marketing in general and just take that away for a minute and take away that terminology that scares a lot of people, such as personal branding and marketing. For me, it's about how can you make someone feel something enough for them to come and say, can I come and find out more? Or I feel like that, can you help me? And you sharing your story through your personal brand in different ways that we're going to talk about. I think that's what it gets forgotten. The terminology overtakes, the imposter syndrome overtakes, that lack of knowledge about what personal branding in overtakes, that overwhelm overtakes them. In actual fact, what we're saying is it's actually about being human and,
yeah,
really for people to understand your story. And understanding the power of telling your story online or, in a personal, organic scenario, such as networking, such as events,
right.
such as, putting yourself, in front of the public with your business. So the topic of obviously this podcast is about personal brand, but we want to talk more about the how, because I
Hmm.
think that is the barrier. We say that there's a misconception with personal branding. A lot of people think, oh my God, I've got to get on video. And when we
Yeah,
know there's different means to telling your personal brand. So I thought we could really focus on the how for this episode to help our listeners. So how do you advise, what's your best practice on how to tell your story through personal branding? How is best to do that, in your professional opinion?
yeah. Great question. I think that it it can people find it difficult, and I think it comes down to this. They think, well, okay, well, I have to tell my story. The problem is that I've lived for 38 years on this planet. That's a lot of information to whittle down there. How do you know
Yeah.
what bits of your story uh, you're supposed to include? And I
Hmm.
think that's kind of the default area that people
Hmm.
get lost. That's the first hurdle. And
Yeah.
in my opinion, the solution to that is to give yourself a really clear way to turn that around and filter it. So
Hmm.
when it comes to telling your story and personal branding for sales, for marketing, for getting more clients, customers, leads, prospect,
Hmm.
interest, all of that stuff, I like to start with, well, let's first forget about your story and let's find out what the who it is that you want to get
Hmm.
the attention of and get the interest of and who you'd
Hmm.
like to ultimately buy your stuff. And
Yeah.
then let's boil it down so we're really, really clear. And this sounds
Hmm.
very simple. It sounds really obvious. People are going to be like, yeah, obviously that's what it is. But trust me, it's not. It's not that obvious when you
Hmm.
actually sit down and try and answer the question. You want to boil it down to what do they actually want? What's the thing? What's the one thing that you can put in like a few words
Hmm.
that's really clear, really simple, and represents if they just had a magic wand, what do they want that's relevant to
Yeah.
what you provide from them? So as
Hmm.
an actor on stage, if I was marketing then, I didn't do any marketing, but if I was doing marketing, I would have said, well, my who I actually really want to serve are
Hmm.
really good directors in the British theatre
Hmm.
industry.
Yeah.
And what's the one thing that they want is brilliant performances that get
Hmm.
them 5-star reviews. So I
Yeah.
might have started figuring out my story in terms of, oh, directors want 5-star reviews for their shows.
Yeah.
Um, and then gone from there. And that would have let me filter and be like, right, so what parts of my story are a really good way to speak to that, to let a director actually
Hmm.
experience all the things about working with me that are going to bring that to life as a
Yeah.
value proposition for them, where they'll go,
Yeah.
man, having heard that story, this sounds like the kind of actor that's going to get me 5-star reviews. So
Yeah.
I just made that up, but I think it's probably actually what I should have done with my acting career in hindsight.
Yeah, I think it's a useful point of thinking about, what is it that they want, rather that presumption. Because
Yeah.
also I think it's about, what's important to them. And we was on a podcast with a book publisher quite early on in the hub, one of the first episodes actually, and as you can imagine in episode 34 there's been a few episodes, and I remember them sharing that when we're telling a story, or you're telling, your brand and personal brand, because that is what your story is, your personal brand, is think of it like a timeline. So
Mm,
think of it like a golden thread, beginning, end, and middle. And what's happened in some key events that are relevant and what the audience would want to know. They sometimes don't need all war and peace. And that's what a lot of people say to me about personal branding. Oh my God, I don't want to go online. I don't want to be sharing all warts and all. And I'm always educating them on it's not just about that. Sometimes that's relevant and sometimes it's not. It's what is it that your audience want to know? How do you want to make them feel? And in
yeah.
that timeline, is there some key events? So, for example, in my business and in my business timeline, I've been in self-employment for 9 years. But in the first 3 years, I was actually doing the business alongside full-time employment because I was building resources. So I share that to show small independent businesses that sometimes we don't have to take that risk and jump all in the beginning. We can test the market, we can test the services and products with that security blanket to make it, a worthwhile decision to go head first in rather than feet first in. So I share my experience about that through my personal branding. So it resonates with the small independent business owner, which is my ideal target audience. I then share about what happened in the background with the pandemic because I had to make some really hard decisions with my original business that was event management. I choose to
Right.
share that. People may say that's warts and all, but I choose to share that because I want people to know that they're working with someone from a place of experience, not a place from textbooks. So I've had a business, I've had to fold a business, I've had to restart the wheel again, and I've had to grow by 750% and then drop that again and pick that back up again because of the state of the economy, over the past 3 years since Brexit. You know, I share that.
Yeah.
People may say, oh, that's Watson, or people don't want to do it or know of it. But I would say the latter, they do because they want to know that they're working with someone who's been there and got the t-shirt. And I might
That's
not
it.
have worn every shirt, but I've worn quite a few shirts and quite a few different hats within my businesses to make sure that the, advice that I'm giving comes from a place of authenticity and comes from a place of experience rather than a textbook. because that's important to me and my values and my brand to make sure it's
Yeah.
authentic. So I really like the fact that you've spoken about the want there, because a lot of people forget the want, they focus on the need. And it's
Yeah.
something that I always use as an example about the Christmas advert. And if we think about the Christmas advert in commercial, you've got John Lewis Christmas advert, you've got the Marks and Spencer's Christmas advert, you've now got Aldi and Lidl Christmas advert with like
Yeah.
the Colin the Carrot. And literally a lot of people say, oh, why is that relevant? And I was like, everyone knows they need a Christmas shop, but what they want is how that advertisement and marketing make them feel. So what they want, like, is the Marks and Spencer's Christmas shop because of that advert, and that's not about personal brand, but it's true representation of that brand,
Yeah.
and that falls into the commercial and brand and the personal brand strategy of the customer. And we can learn things from personal brand and through telling your story because it's playing on that one, it's playing on that need, for your customers. So, is there any other examples you can give about how to best tell the story? Is there anything that you've seen work really well for any clients that you've worked with? I know, for example, Kira, who obviously referred us, absolutely sings your praises in how you supported her. So, how do you best tell your audience to share their story? Is there a popular way to do it, or is it not one size fits all?
Well, it's that's such an important question. I think there's not one size fits all at all, and I think
Hmm.
there's a lot of harm that comes from, trying to squeeze your story into a mold that just doesn't fit. I mean,
Hmm.
the proof in the pudding is, do the people who you want to listen actually listen, and do they keep
Hmm.
listening, and then do they get something from your story? So I think it's great talking about the different types of stories. On the one hand, you've got, say, Kira. So we started off actually identifying what the transformational story that she offered her clients was. What are you
Hmm.
taking them from? Where are they now? And where do they
Hmm.
want to be? And how do you help them get there? So that's not actually even her personal story. It doesn't need to be involved there.
Hmm.
And once we figured that out, I was able to help her create a completely new website um,
Hmm.
copy, so sales page copy, that
Hmm.
was all focused around that transformation that she was really offering underneath her
Hmm.
services. And she texts me within a few days after finishing it and getting it uploaded, like, right, well, we've got several new clients come through the doors as a result of this, so that's amazing already. And
Hmm.
and then further down the page, so here's where it gets interesting. So that's one example of a story which you
Hmm.
could include in your personal brand. It's so interesting that you talk about John Lewis and Marks and Spencer's, because
Hmm.
that's not a personal brand, but they still have a brand story that they're telling.
Yeah. Hmm.
So there is a lot of ways to do this, and it's not one size fits all, as very much like you
Hmm.
suggesting. So with Kira's case, we also decided to include her personal story because, like what you've just said about your story,
Hmm.
I think stories can be like maps at best. I like that analogy, that stories
Yeah.
are like maps that show
Hmm.
how things played out for that person when they made
Hmm.
specific choices
Yeah.
in a specific set of circumstances. Because
Yeah.
I think that's what stories really are. But I think that's what stories really have evolved
Hmm.
from, is that they let us borrow experience, um, and borrow the simulated consequences of what happens if I make certain choices. What are the consequences?
Hmm.
And we can project that into a story and let it play out in a story, and we can see other people's stories and see what happened when they made certain choices under certain
Hmm.
conditions. And then we can take valuable lessons from their pain and suffering without actually having to go through it ourselves necessarily. So you've just saved
Yeah.
yourself a whole bunch of pain and experience. And I think that's what you telling your story and about the ups and downs that you've been through, they
Yeah.
really show that you've
Yeah.
been put through the ringer. You've been tested under
Hmm.
pressure in a crucible, And that's what
Yeah.
we did with Kira as well. We used her personal story to try
Yeah.
and mirror the transformation that she was offering. So it's like,
Yeah.
here's the transformation. I'll help you take your website, which isn't doing anything. This
Mm-hmm.
is what my story might be, to uh, weaving in the right kind of story for you so
Yeah.
that it actually gets people reaching out and making inquiries about working with you or buying your products.
Yeah.
And then you back that up by saying,
Mm-hmm.
right, that isn't just an empty claim. Here's my story to show you with evidence of experience in my life
Yeah.
how you can be sure that I'm someone who can actually deliver on that transformational promise story.
Yeah.
So
Mm-hmm.
those are just like two of the many ways of using your story. And
Mm-hmm.
there's other ways as well, like going back to the know, like, and trust thing. Well,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of a lot of businesses need to some degree or another educate their prospective customers and clients
Mm-hmm.
uh, to some degree on what exactly they do.
Yeah.
And that can often be a really difficult thing because it's like, well,
Mm-hmm.
I know I'm an expert, and when I talk to people who aren't an expert, I lose them very
Mm-hmm.
quickly. Their face
Yeah.
goes blank. I see that I've just lost them. So it can be very difficult to bridge that gap if you're an expert on what you do as a
Yeah.
business, as an expert, whatever.
Yeah.
And a really great way to address that is with stories that can
Mm-hmm.
act like analogies, metaphors. They can just
Mm-hmm.
simplify concepts. So people, instead of glazing over, go, oh, right. Oh, amazing. So it's like that. Okay, I get it. And all of a
Yeah.
sudden, you've kind of
Mm-hmm.
crafted a little bridge for people who don't have your intense expertise and experience
Yeah.
to actually travel to come along with you as you talk
Yeah.
about and educate them. It can also help you to
Yeah.
buy their attention because
Mm-hmm.
stories should be actually enjoyable to listen to and tell. And so the one thing the one commodity that the world simply cannot get enough supply
Mm-hmm.
around is entertainment. People
Yeah.
are just Netflix, Amazon Prime, Apple TV,
Mm-hmm.
they're all buying into entertainment in
Mm-hmm.
with as much money as they can possibly throw at it. And you've got
Yeah.
brands like Nike commissioning Hollywood films about like how Michael Jordan started, and then Ferrari, they've just released a big Hollywood blockbuster.
Mm-hmm.
Why are these brands that sell shoes and commodities and trainers and e-commerce products bothering to pour in hundreds of millions, if not, I don't know, billions, I don't know,
Yeah.
into these stories, just these
Mm-hmm.
entertainment blockbusters.
Yeah.
And it's because they understand that the value of the marketplace is in who can actually get attention long
Yeah.
enough for them people to also spend a little time with you to
Yeah.
understand and get educated about what your
Mm-hmm.
products will do
Yeah.
for them. And stories
Yeah.
are the thing that the marketplace simply cannot get enough of. So if you want
Yeah.
to follow the supply and demand curve of how to fuel your business with attention and leads and prospects, then I'd say that it's not a bad thing to do to copy what John Lewis,
Yeah.
Marks and Spencers, all these big
Yeah.
brands are buying into, which is telling stories.
It is, and I mean, what you say there's kind of music to my ears because it kind of reiterates a few points we've had in the past when we've spoken to corporate brand experts such as like Make a Brew, and talking about moving them from, pain to, you know, pleasure, in reference to
Mm,
moving them away from disadvantages to advantages, and a lot of people say to me, oh, marketing is sales, and I said, no, marketing is creating a relationship, and it's not
yes.
necessarily means that they're going to buy on that first touch point, that first time they see your business and brand. It's about them continuing to build that relationship with you, and ultimately stories sell. You speaking your truth, speaking your story through to your audience in multiple different ways is how ultimately you build that know, like, and trust, and how you can take them on a journey from beginning
Yeah.
to end. And even at that end point, there's always something more after that because they're bought into them values and that brand. I mean, even we're talking about it today with a client, and I asked him, I says, what is one of your key values? And he said, I've got one. And I said, okay, what's that? And he said, hospitality. And I said, okay, think of it like this. Hospitality doesn't just need to mean hospitality in your brand. It can mean H for home, that you make people feel at home by coming into your establishment. He went, right. I said, so you think about your personal brand and your marketing and how you can position your establishments to feel like home. That's a benchmark for you. That's you gaining more attraction because people want to feel like they're working from home. They want to feel like they're having a coffee at home with the best friend. They want to feel
Yeah.
like they're eating home cooked bakes. It does that already. It's just making it really obvious that
Yeah.
people start telling other people and creating that ripple effect. And yes, I smiled when you said about there's a lot to be learned from the bigger companies. There is. I use the example of IKEA when I deliver workshops, and I'll say to everybody, what's IKEA's mission? And they'll all look at me blankly and say, why is this important to the workshop? And I'll share their mission and I'll say, do they represent that? And they go, every single person has said, yeah, that is IKEA to a T. And I'm like, yes, they're a bigger company. Yes, I'm not asking you to be the next IKEA. What I'm asking you to do is understand the power of the brand, the power of your marketing, the power of telling a story, because it should all interlink, because it's all about know, like, and trust. And there is several ways you can do that, as Peter has kindly shared with us through, sharing your own story, putting that on an about section. For us, there is the topic of video and audio. This is a perfect way for us to share a bit of our story through conversations, through people that we meet and other experts. There is telling your stories through press releases, if there is something in form of celebration or growth or innovative or sustainability within organisations. I mean, the world's your oysters, really, guys, for our listeners when you're thinking about personal brand, but it very much is much more than just going to camera and saying, hi, I'm Zoe from Ask Zoe. It's much, much more than that. So when you're thinking about introducing more personal brands within your marketing strategies and within your agendas for your marketing and the outputs, and what you're trying to attract in, really ask yourself, are you being your authentic self? Are they seeing the person behind the business and the brand, or are they just seeing your products and services? Because ultimately, guys, guess what? They don't care. They don't care if you offer, baked goods. They don't care if you offer, marketing services or website services. They really don't care. They care about how you make them feel and what you can do for them. And you're not going to demonstrate that if you're just telling people that you offer X, Y, and Z. They need to know why you offer X, Y, and Z and how you can help them move, as Peter said, through that journey when you're thinking about the power of your personal brand and how best to share it. The one thing I will say before I leave it with Peter to give you one last top tip is do think about the how in reference to different ways you can share that. And what I mean by that is formats, because within your marketing, we always suggest that you need to have text, audio, and visual. So that can be, for example, static posts, static articles, audios, podcasting, videos, for example, voice notes, and visual can be imagery, but it can be video as well. For us, that is always going to expand the reach to reach more people, because everybody, is different in how they receive information. And what marketing is and branding is doing something consistently well. So it can be good and it can be bad, but if it's not consistent, ultimately it's not remembered. So really do think about that when you're thinking about the power of how to tell your story and making sure it's in a means and a format so it can be heard and understood well. So is there anything else you'd like to share, Peter, on the topic of how to tell your story? Any top tip that you want to leave our listeners with that
Yeah.
works every time?
Yeah. Yeah. So I would. The last thing I'd say is, well, let me tell it with a story. So A couple of years ago, I'm having a bit of a identity crisis with, am I an artist? Am I still a British classical stage actor who's worked at the RSC, National Theatre, Shakespeare's Globe? Or am I a marketer? I don't know. I'm confused. And at the time, I'm on I've got a really great business mentor who's got multiple seven-figure companies, but spends most of his time with his family. So
Hmm.
I love that as his values, and that's why I've been drawn
Yeah.
to have him as a business
Hmm.
mentor. And I ask him about this paradox, and he says, "Well, let me ask you why you think you have to choose between the two, because it seems to me like your great passion is storytelling from your acting background, and I'm sure you must know that the best copywriters who make like the most
Hmm.
successful assets, the best sales copy in the world is story driven copy. So why
Hmm.
his question back to me is why do you have to choose? And that's when the penny really dropped for me that
Hmm.
actually the idea of marketing and sales and growing and promoting your business having to be something that's detached from you and your values
Hmm.
is just completely wrong. And for that reason, one of my favorite vehicles, I love that you just listed a bunch of vehicles for storytelling and personal brand. And
Hmm.
two of my favorite ones that work extremely well together, especially for experts, coaches, etc., are writing a client getting book. So it's a book
Hmm.
of your expertise that shows how you help people solve this particular problem in a particular way based on your
Hmm.
experience, and you fill it with stories. Other stuff too, but the stories are what make it really actually genuinely enjoyable to read and mean that
Hmm.
people won't just feel like they're being lectured to with dry how-to information.
Hmm.
And then you use that book to build an email list, which is one of my very favorite marketing channels for creating the golden word that you've used earlier, relationship. It's that
Hmm.
know, like, and trust. It helps you stay in touch with people, and you can
Yeah.
tell them story driven emails that are just a beautiful exercise in freedom, you being you, self expression, sharing what you want and not anything that you don't want,
Hmm.
and actually taking the time to create a connection with
Hmm.
people who've either bought or downloaded your book until they are in a place where you've kind of what I love about stories is that you know usually people's idea of selling is like pressure, hard selling,
Hmm.
trying to get people to buy something. What I love about storytelling and story selling is that it's more like just opening the door so people can
Hmm.
just see inside for themselves and then make up their own mind. When they're ready,
Hmm.
they'll choose to get up and go through the door because you've painted a picture that makes it really compelling and exciting. And so, yeah, that's the last tip that I would share is those are my two favorite vehicles for using storytelling in a practical way to actually grow a business.
I love that, and I'm even making a note of it.
Ah,
Opening the door,
great.
opening the door. Because like I said, that's very much about what it is, and it resonates back, and it just says the point in such a creative way. We talk about kind of people fear marketing and sales, but if you think about market positioning and the importance of positioning the business well, it's about the high street, thinking about your shop front window being that marketing. Now, the more attractive that is, and more enticing, and the more stories that tells, the more uh better chance you've got of them coming in to come and find out more, you know. And a lot of people, don't think that way. They think of it very much as black and white, and I'll be like, look, it's not black. Marketing and sales is not black and white. It's the
Right.
most colourful industry, in my opinion, in the world, along with hospitality. But I am going to say that in events because that's my background.
Yeah.
I'm very passionate about my background
Right.
and what I do, but I do agree with also what you've said about, that how to point and that email as well, because it is about building, that relationship and taking them on a journey and taking from beginning to end and wanting them to come through that door. And and I know that's something that you do very well. So thank you for your time, Peter. I really do appreciate
A
it.
pleasure.
Um, if one of our listeners or our members in the community are listening to this and thinking, yeah, I think I want to work with Peter, I know you've got something exciting coming up, so which is making your services accessible to that entrepreneur. So do you just want to share a little bit more about that before we wrap up today's call?
Yeah, I'd love to. And thank you so much for having me on the call. It's such a lovely conversation to have about, you know, authenticity, connection, relationship building while making more money, basically. It's what a lovely combination. So thank you for having me on.
You're
And yes,
welcome.
I've got something really exciting in the pipeline that I'm launching any day now. It's called the Story Selling Games Workshop. And it's 5 sessions, about an hour long, where we just dive in together with playing with stories with the express outcome of using them to grow your business, get more attention, leads, clients, customers, and do it in a way that's fun, that's authentic, that works
Mhm.
for you. And you can find out about that at peterbraymarketing.com. It's about to drop any day now. I'm super excited. I think this is the most excited I've been about any new thing that I've created. So
Yeah.
I will be having a whale of a time with whoever is interested in finding out more about it.
Amazing. So do pop over, guys, and check out the website. I know that it's dropping this week, so be the first to know, sneak preview. As our listeners, go and check that out. Just big thank you, Peter, for joining us. We really do appreciate it. And we always invite experts along to come and share their view and their opinion on the topics that our members want to know. So if you are listening here for the first time, our members are a part of the Hub community. If you want to learn about how the Hub can benefit you and your business, just head over to askzoe.co.uk under services and you'll find all the information there if you want to come apart and have first-hand access to our experts like Peter. And there's a host of other resources, from webinars to free downloads to discounts with experts, you name it, it's all in there. So do come and join if you need that additional support on a community basis for your business. But that is bringing episode 34 to a close. We thank Peter again. Do go and check out his website, and we will see you next month for episode 35. And we'll see you all soon, guys. Take care.
Thanks. Bye.